So this all started from an idea that was a fundraiser for the Dallas Producers Association. In 2005, Gordon and I worked on a committee for the Dallas producers that with a fundraiser called It Came from Dallas, where we focused on films that were made in the Dallas area and the surrounding areas, really. And Gordon is our resident B-movie historian who focuses on Texas-made films. But he's so much more than that. I mean, I used to say that all the time, but he's so much more than that, because he's now he's writing and researching intros for Ben Mankiewicz on Turner Classic Movies. And so a lot of times when you hear Ben Mankiewicz, you can he's speaking the lines, but I can totally hear Gordon's voice in it.
In fact, he is speaking them right now as we speak.
Oh, what's the movie right now?
Well, the theme tonight was technology in the movies, like evil AI, and so it was starting with 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Of course. So hopefully you're all recording that, so we can watch it when we get home. I know we are. Anyway, so that's kind of where this started. Was we would show just clips. This was a one-night event. We would show clips from the movies, and then Gordon and other people who worked on these films would talk about them. But we would rarely see we would never see the full film, ever. I mean, really, and a lot of times, the only times you could see these films, and especially the campy, quirky ones that we showed last year, were Mystery Science Theater 3000 kinds of shows. And so this year, we went from a sci-fi and horror theme last year, because it was right before Halloween, and decided to pull it out of October so that we could have a little bit broader context and what we were going to talk about, or what we were going to show. And so we landed on, well, first we wanted Giant. Giant is just such a Texas film. It's so amazing. And as we're thinking about Giant, we started with the other films that we wanted to bring in as our crown jewel films. And so we're thinking, Last Picture Show, and we're thinking Tender Mercies. And as you can see in the Tender Mercies poster over here, and also on the Giant poster, which is this is mimicking, they are both wearing cowboy hats, and there's Sam the Lion in the Last Picture Show poster is also wearing a cowboy hat, and so we were like, well, okay, maybe this should be Westerns, but then we wanted to broaden it out and make it more than just Westerns. So we came up with the idea of the independent Texas spirit, and that makes it a broader view. And also we're able to play things like The Blood of Jesus, which is the Spencer Williams all black cast, mostly black crew film that was made in Texas. And that film was considered lost. It was made in 1941 in the Dallas area, south of here, and it was thought to be lost until it was someone who owned a warehouse in Tyler, Texas, called SMU and said, "We've got these films in this room, and we need this room. So if you want them, you need to come get them. Otherwise, we're going to throw them away." Well, when they went and got them, they realized, oh my gosh, there's these films that we thought were totally gone. And so they were able to preserve them and take care of them at the archives at SMU. So we're going to have a special afternoon with that film, and also with a panel talking about film preservation and the archives and why it's so important. So So I just want to throw that in there. And that film is totally independent Texas spirit, as is these 3 films that are our jewel films. But then we also have a film that it was made at the very first Texas State Fair, which was called the Centennial Fair, and that was 1936, and it's called The Big Show, and that's with Gene Autry. And the fact that it was filmed at the State Fair when Texas was 100 years old, and so we're playing that, and we're playing a double feature of that with the A Fair to Remember. It's a documentary about the history of the State Fair. And so that's on Sunday. Then we'll finish out the whole festival with the Mocky Horror Picture Show comedy troupe will be doing live riffing on a film made in Texas called Rock Baby Rocket. And these are it's a loosely threaded plot line, I guess you would call it, to tie in so that we could have full numbers from a number of Texas acts from 1957. So that's going to be really fun to end with. But we're starting the festival with the Tender Mercies, and we have a documentary that's going to play before it. It's Horton Foote, The Road to Home, and we have the filmmaker here. This is Rapp, R-A-P-P, and she is the filmmaker for Horton Foote, Road to Home, but she also worked on Tender Mercies as the script supervisor. And we have Jeannie Oppewall here, who was the art director for Tender Mercies. And so they're here. That's the opening night. That'll be a double feature. And so that is tomorrow night, September the 13th. It starts at 7 o'clock at the Plaza Theater in downtown Garland. So welcome. Thank you all for being here. And so let's start with these 2.
With me?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. What do you want me to talk about?
Do you want to talk about how we picked the films and stuff?
Okay. We decided to go with some Oscar-winning classics of Texas film industry. And there are quite a few now, but starting with some of the early winners. So Giant, which is still like, if any state had an official state film, I'm sure that's the one that would get chosen. In fact, the theme song, I remember they reissued Giant in about 1971, and I remember there was a sort of half-joking, maybe half serious movement to get the theme song to Giant as the official state song of Texas.
Really?
Yes, instead of Texas, Our Texas, which is the most boring state song
It is.
in the USA, and they even make fun of it in the Last Picture Show.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome.
The high school students are singing Texas, Our Texas, and you can see from their faces how boring and dull a song they think it is.
That is so funny.
And there was like a serious movement to get the theme song from Giant. And I would be all for it even now.
Yeah.
Giant was nominated for about 10 Oscars, lost all but one of them to Around the World in 80 Days. And yet, which film do we remember far more today?
Yeah, Giant.
It won 1 Oscar for directing, which is pretty rare for a film to win only the directing Oscar. I think it only happened maybe once again after that. Yeah, nobody even remembers or cares about, Around the World in 80 Days anymore, which won the Best Picture, because, they didn't have James Dean or Elizabeth Taylor. And also we're showing a new 4K restoration of Giant, which looks incredible.
That's so great.
That's what we'll be showing. It looks just incredible. And I think it's a rare chance for people to see it on a big screen. See some people who were, some of them, 3 leads who were legends in their own time. One of them only got to enjoy that for about 9 months, James Dean, who at the time they made Giant, only one of the 3 films that he had a leading role in had been released. That was East of Eden. So people were suddenly getting to know him for East of Eden. He had just shot Rebel Without a Cause before starting work on Giant. And 2 of his co-stars from Rebel Without a Cause are also in Giant. Dennis Hopper and Nick Adams, who was in Rebel Without a Cause and actually looped some dialogue for James Dean's last scene that he was not able to come back and re-record the dialogue for. And, this is stuff of legend that, and to think, we have these 3 in the space of a year. Rebel Without a Cause will be released in December of 1955, and then Giant would be released about 9 months later. So he was already dead before Rebel came out. It's actually an interesting bit of trivia. He was nominated for Best Actor in '55 for East of Giant posthumously, and again for Giant the following year. He's the only actor to be nominated posthumously twice in 2 successive years for Best Actor or anything else. So I think it's a great opportunity to see that. We wanted to look at some of the other Oscar winners. Tender Mercies, which won for Horton Foote screenplay and also for Robert Duvall, which film they had a little trouble getting anybody to make, any studio to back and get distributed, because it was just a little character drama. But Horton Foote was a master of little character dramas, and it's still a great work. A lot of the films we're showing have not only an independent Texas spirit, but they're about the clash between old Texas and new Texas.
That's true.
About Giant very much is. Last Picture Show very much is, which is about what happens, to a very typical North Texas small town when TV arrives, the effect of television and technology on it. And Tender Mercies probably is too, about the changing tastes in music or whatever. Last Picture Show, which I think is one of the greatest, maybe of all, I think any list of the 20 greatest American films ever made, Last Picture Show should be on there. And I first saw it at the college film program at Texas Tech University when I was there. And I've never forgotten it. And we're showing the director's cut version, which is about 6 minutes longer, that Peter Bogdanovich re-edited and was reissued in 1991. And this was the director who had only made one low-budget film that critics liked before that, called Target. He never made another one as good as Last Picture Show after it. He made some good ones, but he never quite got up to that level, which actually got him, even at the time, a lot of comparisons with Orson Welles. That he was hailed as the new Orson Welles by several critics for knocking it out of the park on his first major film, and he never was able to quite come back up to that again either. But and people have made stars out of Jeff Bridges, Sybil Shepherd, Cloris Leachman, who had already been in movies for 20 years practically before that, but wins an Oscar. The story about casting Ben Johnson is pretty great. I saw Peter Bogdanovich at SMU hosting a screening of Last Picture Show in like 1982 with the USA Film Festival, and had lots of interesting stories to tell about it, but he was close to hiring some old country western singer, revered old guy, and he was looking at, oddly enough, Tex Ritter and also Tex Ritter's son, John Ritter, to play the lead male role in it. And he mentioned that, Bogdanovich mentioned that the casting of that part was down to between John Ritter and Timothy Bottoms. And Bogdanovich actually said if he had it to do over again, he would have gone with John Ritter. But he considered John Ritter's father, Tex Ritter, who was, a country singer and B-Western star, strongly for that part, and some other old-time country guys like Ernest Tubbs. And they also, believe it or not, they strongly considered James Stewart, which I just can't picture.
No.
I'm having a hard time picturing that. And Ben Johnson, according to Bogdanovich, he was just going through books of headshots, and he saw Ben Johnson, and he went, of course, Ben Johnson, because Bogdanovich is this worshiper of John Ford, Howard Hawks, and all those things Ben Johnson was in. And Ben Johnson didn't want to do it at first because of the language and the sex that was in the movie. And Bogdanovich went to John Wayne and got John Wayne to convince him to do it. And between him and John Wayne, they both kind of told Ben Johnson, you just want to be known as John Wayne's sidekick the rest of your life. He did it, and as a result, he gives this unforgettable performance that lasts less than 10 minutes of screen time and won Best Supporting Actor Oscar. And it's the shortest performance ever won. It's not the shortest ever won by anybody, but it's the shortest one by a supporting actor.
Right.
Like 9.5 minutes. What else we got? We got Gene Autry, The Big Show, on Sunday, shot at the Centennial, and there is a lot of very poor quality versions of that all over the place and cut down versions, but I found an original length one came from the Gene Autry Museum out in California, so we're showing that. The Roy Rogers Under Western Stars, because it had a premiere in Garland. Some great cartoons, maybe some newsreels if we could stick them in there about Texas or connected to Texas, and some great documentaries like the one on Horton Foote. What am I missing?
Well, let's move on to talking with them.
Yeah, let's do that since we're on it.
Yeah. So, Anne, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start with yours because it is our kickoff to the festival is with Horton Foote. So tell us your history with Horton Foote. I mean, was working on Tender Mercies your first time to meet him?
Yes, first time I met Horton was on the set of Tender Mercies. And I was a script supervisor, so I had his Bible in my lap the whole movie.
Yeah.
And Horton and I hit it off. He wasn't on the set a lot. My memory was
not the whole time.
He would pop up.
He was there,
but he'd stay in the shadows. He certainly wasn't he didn't want to be too much of a presence on the set. But he would come, and a lot of times he would kind of sit next to me, and we got to know each other pretty well right off the bat. And the funny thing about my relationship with Horton, we became fast friends.
That's so cool.
And this was in 1981, fall of 1981. And he found out, he like Horton always did, he always wants to know about the other guy. He started asking me about who am I and where did I come from. And I came from a small cotton farm in the Texas Panhandle, which is the opposite end of Texas. He's southeast Texas. Yeah. And but he came from cotton country too, but it was two completely different climates and everything about the way they grew cotton in southeast Texas and northwest Texas. And so all of our conversations, we didn't talk about movies, we didn't talk about theater. I didn't even know what he did in theater, really, at that time. I learned really fast. Yeah. But all he wanted to know my stories from, we would talk about going to the cotton gin and things like we begged for rain in the Panhandle.
Yeah.
So when it rained and you couldn't work in the fields, all the daddies were at the cotton gin, and they were just happy and they got too much rain where he came from. So the guys would all be at the cotton gin morose.
Oh.
And we would just share all these great and family stories and everything. So anyway, I bonded with him, and we stayed in touch after the movie. And that was long before internet and anything in these devices we got. And we wrote letters. We wrote cards and letters.
That's wonderful.
And it wasn't not like a once a week thing or
Yeah.
anything, but every few months I'd write him a card, or he would always respond. And we stayed in touch all those years. And when Horton turned 90, his wife Lillian had already died. He was basically living with his daughter Hallie. He was no longer living in New York. He was living with Hallie in Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
And but they never got rid of the homestead. The house they actually built for his parents when he was 1 year old.
Wow.
It's still in existence there, and is still in the family.
Wow.
And so Horton, he always had an writing office there, and he loved to come. It was in this town called Horton, Wharton.
Mm-hmm.
And he loved to come and write there. So Hallie would bring him, and sometimes he'd stay for a couple of weeks, and other times he'd stay for a couple of months. And I had just moved back to Austin from LA, and we ran into each other at an event in Austin. And so I started, every time Hallie would bring him, I would go down and spend an afternoon with him, because it's about a 2-hour drive from Austin.
Right.
And spend the afternoon. And Horton's favorite thing to do was go to lunch, and then he wanted to get in the back seat of the car. Hallie would drive, and I would usually be in the front with her, or sometimes with him back there. And he wanted to go up every street of every town, of the whole little town, and turn the corner and come back the next one. And he would tell me the history of, like, who lived in this house.
Oh my gosh.
And that man shot his wife. And
Oh my gosh.
this used to be a cotton field. And after a couple of those trips, I was driving home, and I would always be driving home on a high from these afternoons with Horton. And I thought, I'm getting the backdrop of that man's been writing plays and movies for 70 years, mainly plays. He's really known more as a theater writer than a movie guy, even though he won 2 Oscars, that Kill a Mockingbird and Tender Mercies.
Only
won 2 Oscars. And a Pulitzer Prize for drama, and an Emmy, and the National Medal of Arts with Bill Clinton in 2000. And he was the president, whatever they call it, the Presidential Medal of Arts.
Yeah.
And I mean, he was an amazingly awarded guy that a lot of people in Texas don't even know who he is. But anyway, I finally one day asked him, I said, can I bring a camera down here?
good for you.
Because someone needs to document this. And I wasn't even thinking documentary. I was thinking, this just needs to be documented. Him driving all over this town, because that town inspired 90% of his work.
Yeah. What year was that you approached him with
that would have been probably 2000, around 2006.
Okay.
I moved back to Austin in 2000, but it might have been a little before that. It might have been 2005. Well, anyway, so the next, and he said, I have to think about this. And he thought about it, and about 2 weeks later, I was having dinner with him, and he said, you know, I've thought about it, and I think I'm going to let you do this. But he said, and it was one of the greatest things I've ever heard. He said, the reason I'm going to do this is because I trust you.
Oh.
And then he said, there's only one thing I'm going to have to ask you to, I have one condition, that's it. And I said, what? He said, no one can ever ask me on camera if any of my characters were inspired by a certain person. And Hallie was in the kitchen cooking. I was in the living room with him, and she's listening to us. And she yells out of the kitchen. This is Hallie's his daughter, an actress that did most of his plays. And Hallie yells from the kitchen. She goes, "Oh, Dad, they're all dead by now."
Oh my God!
And he goes, "Yes, but their grandchildren are still." And he was so adamant about not exploiting anyone. And as we all know, anybody who does writing, we base characters on people, but most every character is a combination of yourself and 5 other people, and it's not just one person. Very rarely is it based on one person, and so his characters are a combination of a lot of people. But anyway, that's how it started. So I took a camera crew down there. And a bunch of my guys, those original guys, are going to be here tomorrow.
Oh, so glad.
And I want to make sure they get recognized tomorrow.
Tell the names.
The original 2 producers were Joe Dishner and Don Stokes. And they were both Dallas guys. Joe was a production manager who worked for years out of Dallas. Mm-hmm. And Don ran one of the biggest post-production houses in Dallas that was his father's.
Right.
And then Don took it over. And so they were 2 of my original producers. And then the third guy was a guy named Mark Birnbaum, who's a very good documentary filmmaker who's still making documentary films.
Yeah, awesome.
And he was he was invaluable because he knew how to shoot documentaries. And I'd been on a lot of productions and could run a little production, but he really knew. He was great. And then we had a second camera guy when Mark wasn't available, named Bill Schwartz, and Bill Schwartz is also fabulous. So I had 2 of the best cameramen, and they did a good part of the first several years. Anyway, we shot Horton for 3.5 years. Every time he would be anywhere near, we would go down there with our cameras, and we paid for it out of our own pockets.
Wow.
And we shot by the seat of our pants and begged for free equipment, and you know that thing you do.
Yes.
And we shot him, and every time we could until he passed away in 2009. Wow. He passed away in, I think it was March of 2009. And then that's when I started accumulating other interviews and everything. And we also lucked out. We got to a point where we couldn't just keep funding it ourselves,
right?
Because we were all out a lot of money.
Right.
And we got an amazing grant from the Houston Endowment. And because Houston always kind of considers Horton a hometown guy, because his hometown was an hour out of Houston.
Yeah.
So that really boosted us. And this film took me from start to finish 15 years. I've never done anything in my life for 15 years.
Wow.
I never was married to anybody for 15 years. I've never done anything for 15 years.
Well, thank you for your stick-to-itiveness on this one.
And so tomorrow night you're going to get to see this film. But I tell you, the star, you've seen it, right?
Oh, yeah.
The star of this film, I remember, the star of this film is Horton Foote. The smartest thing I did was just put a camera on him and keep it rolling. You'll just fall in love with him.
Yeah.
He's unbelievable. And I'm at first also, and then I'm going to shut up because y'all want to listen to her. But
well, I want them to chime in as well.
I was worried a lot of times during filming that I had maybe started a little bit late because Horton was pretty old. And there were some days he was a little more fragile than others. He was always sharp as a tack.
That's awesome.
But I thought, oh my gosh, should I have done this 10 years ago or whatever? And but the way the film ended up unfolding, it is perfect because he really tells his life in reflection.
Yeah, he does.
And it's almost like that age helps. Mm-hmm. And he's brilliant. And so anyway. That's how my documentary came about.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Hey, Haley?
Okay, so I'm Haley. My brand is called History Undressed. It's a social media brand that focuses on fashion and film history. So I guess my main question, because this took so long for you to create, and was that vision always there, or did that kind of accumulate over time? And was throughout all your time during creating this project, did you ever feel like creatively stalled, or did you ever get to a point where like, am I wasting my time?
Yeah. Basically, I had a stall in the middle. That's the reason it took so long. I went through 3 editing crews until I got the right one.
Oh wow!
And the middle one really stalled me because it was fancier people out of New York who I really trusted, but they would just put me on hold and say, we'll be back to you. And I finally had to break that tie and get back, and I found an editing crew in Austin So I had a big lag in the middle, but I will also blame myself a lot for that because I didn't know post-production. I knew production like the back of my hand because I've been on a lot of movie sets, and I knew how to put that stuff together. But I didn't know all the post-production process, and I really had to have help with that. And also piecing together a documentary. I'd only worked on narrative films and fiction, and piecing together finding a narrative in a documentary was not easy. And what is this film about? But I always knew, and I stuck to my guns with this, and I'm really happy I did. I always knew that this film was about his connection to that hometown, because that was the connection to his entire body of work. And everything he wrote, he drew from that hometown. And I had a lot of people try to sway me from that, like, no, that's going to be boring. You need to focus on this slick Broadway and off-Broadway theater career he had and all of that. And I thought, that's not Horton. Who's Horton is who those characters are in those plays. And those plays are straight out of Horton, Texas. And
I'm glad you stuck to that.
And I just kind of, sometimes I would have a hard time articulating it to people, and they didn't get it. It was very frustrating. But when I finally found the crew that got it, the post-production crew, my editor and my post-production supervisor and that crew, man, we just started flying. And so I reached a point where I knew, I had a talk with myself one day, and I said, here's what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to go Horton was long gone. You're going to have to go to Hallie Foote and his family, and you're going to have to tell them, I tried my best, and I didn't get this done. Or you're going to have to pull up your bootstraps, no matter what, and figure out how to get it done. And I knew what I had to do.
Now, isn't that the independent Texas spirit right there in that conversation?
Well, thank you.
Seriously.
And because I'm not a quitter. I won't quit something when I should quit something. Daddy used to say to me, and when your horse dies, get off.
Oh.
And I'm like, no, keep going. So I have to say that I'm not a quitter, and I just couldn't quit. And I couldn't disappoint them. I couldn't disappoint Horton, even though he was gone. So I just bucked up and did it. And boy, am I glad I did, because in the end, that wasn't an easy 15-year process. But I'm really proud of the end product.
Well, and our festival, this is a North Texas premiere of this film, because it came out during the pandemic, and so that had to be a little challenging.
That was a drag.
Yeah.
After 15 years, and then you only get to do virtual festivals.
Yeah. So we get to see it in person.
I know. So anyway, but it and I'm really glad for this too, because there's some people coming. I have friends coming tomorrow that are Dallas filmmakers that are still working. And I don't know. It would be. I wish that some Dallas people would. Some of the people that I used to work with in Dallas would show up.
Invite them.
I don't know. We'll see.
Yes, but definitely invite them.
Because I just think that when you contacted me, my first thought was, I need to screen this in Dallas, and I wrote my guys an email too and said, what do you guys think? And they're all like, hell yeah.
Right.
So anyway, so here we are. Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, I got to see the film at one of its premieres in Oxford, Mississippi, of all places, where, literacy is king there. The film is beautiful. So talk to me about the flow of your film, because I really like the flow of your documentary. So talk to me about, how you set it up and just all the other, non-Horton interviews, the archival material. So how did you set that up, and what was your aha moment on your documentary when you knew you had this?
Actually, my aha moment happened fairly early, because we shot. Everybody will see tomorrow the film. Horton is in it a lot, and every single time I did a test screening, every test audience would say, more Horton, more Horton, more Horton. And I'd go back and throw out a couple of interviews and put more Horton in, because you just fall in love with that guy.
Yeah, that's true.
But the first 2 trips down there, we did all the car stuff. You'll see footage of a lot of him driving around. That was the crux of it. I just wanted to document that. To me, that meant everything for the film. So we did 2 whole days of drive. One day we did the whole town. The second day we did all the way out in the country. The second trip down there, I did 2 main interviews with him. One was in a porch swing outside in the swing on his front porch. The other one was we did it kind of at dusk in this big high back chair, him sitting in his parlor. And he was magic, especially on those two sit-down interviews. And I just thought, no matter what else I get, I got magic in that interview in that high back chair, because that was the night we asked him about all the projects, and he took us through To Kill a Mockingbird, and he takes us through Tender Mercies and Trip to Bountiful, but also some smaller projects, One Armed Man and other things, and he was just brilliant. And I felt like I had 80% right there. Mm-hmm. All I had to have is other people talking about Horton. Well, I can tell you that people love to talk about Horton because he didn't have I swear he didn't have an enemy on the planet. And people wanted to talk about him and relay their experiences with him. And he crossed paths with a lot of really interesting people. We have Edward Albee in it. We have Bruce Beresford, the director of Tender Mercies. We had a lot of actors that he worked with, and Matthew Broderick's in it, and then there's a lot of. But we didn't try to go for all the biggest names in Hollywood. But I really think the aha moment. I knew I had the meat when our second trip down there. You just know, and that's why I couldn't give up on it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, Jeanine, tell us about your coming into work on Tender Mercies.
Oh, let me think.
Yeah.
I had a friend from Dallas who lived in Los Angeles. And he had done some films in the design department with Scorsese, I think, in New York, not as the top designer, but a designer.
Sure.
And he got the call from the producers about doing the movie, which made sense. Of course, he was known as a local design guy. And he said, "Not interested. I'm directing plays now. I am not interested in designing films." And then he looked at me and he said, "Hey, I just got this call. Why don't you do it?"
Okay.
And I had done a few films working for a big name production designer named Paul Silbert, who got Oscar nominations and Oscars, and I got along very well with him. And when my friend suggested to the producer that they should call me, the producer called me and then said, I don't want to spend too much money. Is there anybody in New York who can vouch for you? And I thought, okay, call Paul Silbert. So I guess that Bruce Beresford called Paul Silbert, and Paul said, what kind of film is it? And Paul said, "Oh yeah, hire her."
That's great.
So I got on one of the last, what is that big Texas airline? Braniff Airline.
Oh, yeah.
I got on one of the last, as it turns out, Braniff Airline flights from Los Angeles to Dallas.
Really?
And I looked at that plane and I realized that plane was designed by a guy that I knew because I worked for many years for Charles Eames, and one of Charles Eames' best friends was Alexander Gerard, and Alexander Gerard did the entire design program for that airline.
Wow.
The exteriors, the worked with the costume people, the interiors. And I remember getting on that plane and thinking, wow, this is some kind of really interesting plane. Wait a minute. Sandro designed this plane. And then I knew why it was different from other airlines. It was really great to sit in those chocolate brown leather seats. And anyway, I got to Dallas, and of course I was terrified. I had never done the job before. I'd done a lot of, let's just put it this way, I was very comfortable telling other people what to do, having done it for years. And my mother always used to describe me as she used to say when I would come home from college, "Now we don't need you marshaling us around."
Oh, okay.
Okay, so I was good at marshaling people. So I got to Texas, and it turns out that the producers had been to Dallas area before I did, and they had gone scouting, and they had found a place they thought was suitable. And the first thing comes to my head, I'm thinking, oh man, this is going to be awful.
No.
Because I was accustomed to producers having lots of opinions, and their opinions about designs in general were pretty bad. So I thought, oh, this isn't going to be very good. But I went out and I looked at the place, and I thought about it, and I said, yeah, I can make this work. Now, I want to ask you a question. How many of you have seen the movie? Has everybody seen this movie?
Oh, yeah.
Been a long time.
Long time, right? How many of you think that place existed?
The motel set you're talking about.
Correct. How many of you people think that existed before we started filming?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You thought it existed?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. I'm going to show you something.
Okay.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the design process. I'm just going to race through this because I promised I would do it 2 more times while I'm here, and I'm going to get tired of hearing myself talk about it. All right, so the first thing I want to tell you is that you can never expect, as a designer of a film, to have anybody design covers for the DVDs or that look any good.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really kind of like they either hire different people, or I don't know. But anyway, I looked at those things and I thought, oh, how sad. But anyway, this is the set.
Yes.
Okay, what existed when it was shown to me was that center building.
Okay.
The center building was a kind of a, how can I describe it? I guess I'd say it was a sharecropper's house.
Okay.
It was completely decrepit and unpainted, falling into serious ruin. It was somewhere between Waxahachie and Palmer, Texas. And I looked at it and I thought, well, I can make this work. And I had spent some time before I came to Texas doing a little research on motels. And I want to show you what I learned. These are pictures of motels designed at the time. Mm-hmm. Now, there's several popular motel designs. This is the U-shaped one. These are the flat front, straight on to the road ones. Mm-hmm. These are the attached cottage style. Mm-hmm. These are just kind of no design style. And I drove the main highway from Dallas to Fort Worth, the old main highway. I went to the library somewhere in Dallas, and can I have an old map from the 1940s?
Yes.
So I drove the whole way on this road, and these are the things that I saw that inspired me to think about how in the world was I going to deal with this set. So, you see, they come in every style imaginable. And I also photographed the signs because I knew I had to have a sign. There they are. Fabulous signs, I have to say. I hope some of them are still standing, or at least not standing in a museum. And this more. Mm-hmm. And that's my drawing. So you see the middle building and then the two side buildings.
Right.
Okay, so what I want to tell you about that is that there is no motel design that I have ever seen on record that looks like this, because I wanted to lay that thing out in a Y shape, which is a welcoming sign. Here I am, I'm opening my arms to you, the passerby. That's why it has a completely idiosyncratic design. If I didn't think like that as a metaphor for how do I make a good metaphor by way of the set for the story, it would have probably been all flat fronted to the highway. That would have been the obvious thing to do, but I just decided, oh well, I'm just going to do it this way because it makes sense emotionally to me to do it this way. And then I sat back and I waited and I thought eventually someone will call me and say, what are you thinking? There are no motels like that. Never heard a word.
Good.
Okay, so now I want to tell you a little bit more. You see the gas sign right there? If you look carefully at it on the film, this is how I arrived at the gas sign. Driving around Dallas, I see this old, decrepit gas station, and I stopped in because it was so old, it was interesting looking, and it was called the Good Luck Oil Company, GLOCO. So I stop in, I get some gas, and I chat up the guy. And I say, hey, and I'm thinking this is a really idiosyncratic Dallas kind of, oil company. Why? Maybe the guy wants some publicity or something, and the gentleman who ran the gas station just gives me the phone number of the guy who owns the company. And I'm thinking, what? No publicity? What? Okay. So I call the guy and I say, I'm so-and-so and I'm doing such and such a film. And, sometimes I know you guys have graveyards of signage. Do you think maybe you could have something I could rent or borrow? And he says, yes. And here's the address, and I'll tell my guy to meet you at this place. So I drive out there, and I go rummaging through the whole graveyard. I get the gas pumps, some of the light fixtures, the sign. That round sign is actually a sign that would go on the back of one of his oil tankers.
Oh, really?
It is not an official GLOCO sign. It's one that I took a piece of metal from the back of the room, and I thought, I'll take that, thank you. And I just hung it there as the sign. Now, you see down there what it says, Rosalie's Motel? Nobody had any idea what they wanted to call this motel. I asked Horton, whatever. I asked Bruce, whatever. So I'm thinking, I'm not going to ask the producers. He'll give me some idea I don't want to have to go by. So I thought, I'm going to call it the Mariposa Hotel. This is after I'd done this little thing that said Rosalie's. A year after a friend of mine sees the film, he happens to be an entomologist, he calls me, he said, hey, did you design that film, Tender Mercies? I can only imagine it had to be you. Nobody else would call it the Mariposa Hotel. Because I'm interested in butterflies. I have all my life been interested in butterflies. And I put butterflies in every movie.
Oh.
Sometimes they get edited out. Sometimes they're very well hidden. You can't see them. But I was personally responsible for it being the Mariposa Motel. So this is just to tell you a little bit about how designers think, how they work, and how things are actually quite personal that look very impersonal. So
I love that.
Now you can go back and you can see there's the motel. I saw it on the side of the road standing there empty, and I went up to the bang on the door of the building that the sign existed in and said, hey, can I buy this sign? Okay, $100.
All right.
So I handed him $100, and then I hired a neon sign company to come, and I designed the way it ought to look. And that's how that's how the motel came to be, really. And here you see it at night, and if you look carefully, what you can see is that it says Mariposa Motel, and the E and the L have less gas in them. So it looks slightly broken and on the fritz. A little secret I learned.
That's awesome.
Put less gas in the neon signs and they don't look as good. So that was it at night. Okay, and these are just some more pictures of those details. I'm going to go through really quickly.
$1.21 gas.
Yeah, I know.
I know.
Yay, baby. That's never going to happen.
I know.
Now, when I look at this years later, when I looked at this film again, I felt like I made a mistake,
Uh-oh.
which was everything has a green, a red, and a white to it, except for one gas pumps that have a little hit of blue and the ice machine that has a little hit of blue. And I think putting the little striped caravan that Duval lives in for a while and the blue and white truck, well, I don't know, maybe it was too much. But that's how I think now. That's not how I thought then. It was my first film. You learn and live, you know. Mm-hmm. Okay, and then there was the question of, finding the right furniture, which I felt ought to be, kind of a pushback to another era. Because when I read the script, I was raised in a very Protestant family, and the whole story made a lot of sense to me because this woman, Rosalie, lives her life very much the way her mother did and her grandmother did before her, with the same tradition and the same kind of values. And I was looking for objects and things that would convey that kind of sense of the values from the past. So the kitchen looks the way it does. That's why the living room looks the way it does. So the office is stuff that's a little bit too old even for then, because some people do live their lives in the past. Not everybody has a house that looks like it just came out of Restoration Hardware yesterday.
Right.
So this is basically what the interior looked like. And there's the motel interior. One of the buildings we built out as the motel room. The other one was built to house grip and electric equipment.
Oh, nice.
Just to be, not only was it making it welcome, but it was making it practical, which is something you always have to think about as a designer. How can you keep the set mess to a minimum?
Right.
So it was, standard old-fashioned wood paneling, and it was, there's something about living in a flat area where you have the illusion of being able to see for a very long way that produces a kind of state of mind that's different from people living in the mountains. And what Bruce said to me was, you need to somehow understand why it is that Rosalie would take a marriage offer from this ne'er-do-well recovering alcoholic singer. And the thing that impressed him about the landscape around this place was that you understood that it's, 5 miles this way, another 10 miles to the other town the other way. No good offers are going to come down the road for you. Mm-hmm. You have to accept what comes because the next offer maybe is never going to get there.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the feeling that we were going for, is to try to explain a little bit by way of environment how she ended up accepting this arrangement. And we had to plant the garden. Of course, it was late, and the only thing we could get that would grow is cabbages. That's a whole other story. And piled up all the junk in the back. And I kind of, as a young designer, was asking Bruce too many questions, I think. Well, what do you think about painting it this, or what do you think about painting? And he just looked at me and he said, I gave you a list of 5 things to do, and that's your problem. It is not mine. Okay.
In an Australian accent.
What?
In an Australian accent.
Yeah, it is his accent, right. So here again, it's like emphasizing the flatness and the loneliness of the terrain right around. and the garden. This is the important, famous scene of, I don't trust happiness, I never did and I never will. And then you see them, the only thing you can do really in response to that is, take your kid outside and play football because, that's the only proper human response to situations that are like this. So I remember that we had to drag that log around to give them a place to sit so that we could shoot back to the set. And the church, I was shocked and amazed in this church that it actually had a baptism place inside the church. I had never seen that before. I'd read about it. I hadn't seen it. I thought, wow, this is pretty great. We got to shoot here. And then this is the town of Palmer, which was about 4 miles from the set. And it's pretty run down, pretty sad at the time. And I drove all around Dallas to all the little towns and just kept picking up little details and little ideas. And one thing I noticed a few times is something called the domino parlor. So when Bruce said, well, we should shoot that, they should go in the feed store and then come on past these guys. So I said, well, we can make it a domino parlor and we can put some, guys out there playing dominoes. And then there's a feed store, which was owned by Mr. Harper, who also owned the property that the motel was built on. And the Grand Ole Opry and Grapevine, which we built a little bit of a set, and we did those posters, of course, for the songs that she sings, and something you never see in the film, but we did anyway. So you always do a lot of work on a film as the designer, and you do it largely to help the actors build for themselves a proper environment, a proper nest for what they have to do. So I designed a bunch of these album covers, I'd say maybe 5 or 6, I don't remember, there, for sale here and scattered around her room and then scattered in her house. And this is all, my taking the photograph and going out and buying some Letraset and putting it all on there by hand, the old-fashioned way. And then the house that we shot in was in Dallas. I don't remember exactly where. We shot it for Dixie Scott, the singer's house. It was kind of cold, kind of upscale, kind of hard. And I remember, the one thing I remember about it is the gentleman that owned the house that allowed us to shoot there did all of his business every day from the bathroom in his bathrobe.
Really?
Yes, and I don't know what he did, I never asked, but he came out every day with his bathrobe, and he was always tying his bathrobe, and I thought, oh my God. So you go.
So he did his business in the bathroom.
Yeah, he did. All of his business. All of his business.
Sorry,
I kept thinking, am I gonna have to fight this guy off at some point? It was so bizarre. It was such a bizarre experience. Well, he got his money, and I had to deal with him, and I didn't tell a single soul what went on in there.
Secrets from the set.
Anyway, that's it. So that's just a quick run-through of...
Thank you for going over
Can I just tell one little quick story about that motel set?
Yes.
You may or may not even know this. Years later, I met a woman whose grandfather owned that property that they ended up using.
Mr. Harper.
And she told this story to me later. Apparently, when your crew was out there putting that set together, and they had just put the gas pumps.
Oh
out.
yeah, we had people coming by to buy gas.
There was one old guy who came by and stopped and said, because this was just this lonesome road out nowhere. And this old guy came by and got out and went up to one of your crew members and said, You know, this is a terrible place to put a gas station. And your crew had to say, well, sir, it's a movie set. It's not a working gas station.
Not a
it's
working
movie
gas.
set."
And it happened a few times when we were working there. So I finally said to the construction guy and the paint guy, okay, look, I can't deal with this anymore. I can't spend half of every day going over, no, sir, it is not a working gas. So we put up a big sign that said, movie set, no gas, no Coca-Cola.
Funny.
But it was one of those because it was meant to be very naturalistic, very realistic.
Sure.
And as a result of that, people always think we just found it like it was. We just walked in and put on the cameras. But as you can see, there's a lot of work.
That's talent.
And
yeah.
it's a lot of unknown work, unseen work.
Yes.
And it's personal.
Yes.
In a very odd kind of way. I mean, somebody else would do just as good a job, but they would do it in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely.
As a designer. So it is an expression of who you are. What your work is like this is definitely an expression of who you are, who you come from, you know, how you behave, how you think other people should behave toward each other.
Sure.
So it's just something I think about a lot, you know, how to talk about what it is that film designers do when it looks like you didn't do a damn thing.
Right. Thank you. That's brilliant. That's
I'm sorry,
brilliant.
that's like racing through it really
Haley.
quickly.
I'm sorry, I have so much to say.
Yes, that's
Uh-oh.
No, I've been like jumping around. Well, it's because I'm so inspired by you. First of all, every single still that you showed us is so beautiful. It's not just the color scheme. It reminds me a lot of the birds because it's full of people, it's full of color, but yet it looks so desolate. And so hearing you to describe how much effort that you put into it in every single detail, beautiful story. Thank you for sharing with us. I guess my question is, with all of your everything that you just told us, how does this translate to your personal life, and how do you kind of create your own space, and do you feel the need to create your space to make it your haven, or I'm curious about that.
You mean about my own house?
Yeah, just about your personal spaces.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, this has nothing to do with my personal space. I'm a child of mid-century modern. I worked for Charles Eames, who, if you know who he was, at the time he was alive and I was working with him, he was the United States' most famous living designer. He designed the Eames lounge chair, the plastic molded chairs, the wooden plywood molded chairs. That's the stuff for which he was best known. So that's my style. I mean, I feel comfortable in that. The first time I saw that furniture that he had designed, I thought, that's for me. I can't stand that old 1940s bulbous, disgusting, fat, overstuffed mohair shit out of Season Roebuck. But what I like about making movies is that I get to try out a different personality. Mm-hmm. So I've tried out Victorian personalities. I've tried out, this sort of sharecropper housing, motel, gas station on a personality. I mean, every film that I've chosen to work on, by and large, I've made some mistakes, as everybody does, I get to try out a different personality and see what that would be like, living like that person in that person's skin, not my own. Mm-hmm. And it's a very interesting, way to live your life, is to just, because you have to totally inhabit the story, totally inhabit the characters. It's my job to figure out really on a whole lot of levels who they are physically, because I take responsibility for all of the environments of any given film. And that's what you drive through, what the actor sits on, what the background is, whether it's built or found and fixed.
much like a costume designer, you're basically looking at the script and inhabiting that while you're working on that project.
I'm sorry, come again?
So I said, like, much like a costume designer, you look
Yeah.
at the script and you inhabit that for
Yeah.
the duration of that project.
That's
And I
right.
like that.
Yeah.
Is there a specific, you said you dabbled in Victorian, you dabbled in that. Is there a specific kind of aesthetic, I guess, that you found that you had the most fun doing?
I had a lot of fun with this one. I also did a small film called Pleasantville, in which we built the entire town. And the funny story about that is that I went to the premiere of the movie, which happened to be in Seattle for reasons I no longer remember. And I sat down in my seat in the back, reserved for crew people. And some gentleman came and sat next to me, and I turned around a little bit, and then I see the producer, who I actually liked, waving at me, "Come here, come here, come here, come here." So I got up, I tramped over this gentleman, and I talked to the producer, and he said to me, "You know you're sitting next to the guy who runs the company that paid for the film."
Oh.
It was a New Line or something. I can't remember exactly anymore. And I said, "Yeah." So? And he said, "For God's sake, don't say anything. He thinks we found that town."
Oh.
Because his instructions were, do not build it. Too expensive.
Do not build it. Oh.
So I hired a couple of location people. I sent them all out all over California. Come back and find me this town. And they all looked at me like I was nuts. I said, this is not about finding the town. This is about proving that it cannot be found and it must be built. So it's politics everywhere, baby.
Which in Pleasantville was supposed to look like the perfect 1950s.
Yeah.
Correct.
Father knows best. Andy
Correct.
Griffiths, small town.
Correct. Like we were
Yeah.
going to find that? I don't know.
Yeah.
Not in California. I mean, maybe in Iowa.
Yeah.
Bob? He's got a question.
It's interesting that you named the hotel Mariposa, which is butterfly.
Butterfly in
Right.
Spanish.
And then essentially butterfly goes through a transition and it's very transient in nature. And so it looks like the people were going through a metamorphosis. And
Yeah, they were. I mean, that's why I named it that, was thinking about the nature and meaning of change.
exactly.
You start out as one thing, and after a while, you've turned into something else, and you're not really sure how did that happen.
Right.
So I don't have anything else brilliant to say. I'm hoping someone will ask me one question, and then I can go stop talking.
No.
There's
Yes,
one right
Brian?
over here. Right there, too.
Two questions.
There.
We're going to have a couple.
Oh, I just was curious about the overlap between the prop master and the designer, and did you work closely with them, and when does something become a prop? Is it when they're actually, the actor is holding it?
Yes.
Or is it just on the set?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that is the technical definition. And I have had various experiences with various kinds of prop masters. And one thing that I have learned is to grab the head of the, but because my job is a job that works ahead of filming, I find the most satisfaction from doing the research, thinking about the characters, deciding what they should have, thinking about what color things should be and what the color psychology is and why. That is, it's just a satisfying, challenging, odd kind of way to spend your life.
You're setting the movie up in your head, basically.
Yes.
As much as the
Yes.
director's just coming on.
Yes.
I mean, that's all a cohesive thing. But I mean,
Well, I remember saying to Bob De Niro, I worked with him on one film as the director, and he was very anxiety-ridden about a couple of things that he just couldn't stop worrying about. And finally, I looked at him and I said, Bob, I need to ask you to stop worrying about it, because it is my job to solve this problem. And I can assure you, since I want to keep my career, I am going to solve this problem. And they just laughed, and that was the last we discussed.
Oh, that's great.
It just got done.
Well,
Because it's my job. I have to do it. There's nobody else who's going to tell me what to do. I have to get it done. As Ann said about, her 15-year project, I have like 5 months, I got to get it done. It's got to be all done. Because they're going to arrive with the cameras, and they are going to shoot no matter if you are done or not.
Right.
So the best idea is to get it done. The nature and meaning of a deadline, very important.
well, we need to wrap up. So is
We
there?
had one
No,
more.
it's okay.
You all right?
I'll ask over dinner.
I'll be here tomorrow night to watch your documentary, but is it available on disc or stream?
It is. You can find it on Apple TV and Amazon Prime.
Great.
And then and my distributor is a company called Grasshopper Film out of New York, and they have their own platform that's called Projector, but it's take out that is PROJECTR. But that's not the easiest way. The easiest way is to just go on Apple TV or Amazon Prime, and those links are on my website. It's called HortonFooteFilm.com, and that's the first thing that comes up. You can click on any of the links.
Or come see it tomorrow night.
Yeah.
And we'll be in person with the filmmaker.
Yeah.
Thank you. Is there anything that we haven't asked or haven't talked about that you would like for us to know before we wrap up?
No, I can tell one Horton Foote story.
Okay, go ahead.
I didn't have the relationship with the man that Ann had, because not on the set all the time, but I remember Bruce and Mr. Duvall had a set to about something, and they agreed to come back to work after separating.
We call that a come to Jesus in Texas.
Come to Jesus moment. And I remember Horton was terrified that something more in the relationship was going to go wrong. And we were in the Grand Opry in Grapevine, Texas. And we were standing in the lobby, we heard Duvall raising his voice. And Horton grabbed me, and he had this look of deep distress on his face. He didn't say anything. He just grabbed me because he was so anxious that something was going to go wrong. And we just both stood there kind of glued to each other, waiting to hear if there was going to be more shouting. Anyway, that's my intimate moment with Horton Foote.
That's great. That's great. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Oh, I could share more, but I'm not gonna.
Okay.
I just want to say this meeting tonight actually marks a reunion between me and Ann Rapp, who both worked on our first film in 1979. Wow. Down on the border of Texas.
Don't look for it, because
Don't look for
you can't find it.
was my first film and her first film, and I just showed her some pictures I still had from it in a scrapbook. It was a sequel, and I'm not making this up, to The Outlaw Josie Wales that never got released.
It's called The Code of Josie Wales.
Wales.
Never saw the light of day.
And it was called The Return. When we were shooting it, it was called The Code of Josie Wales, and then during its very brief time on VHS, it was called The Return of Josie Wales. Clint Eastwood was not in it. Michael Parks was the star and director. So
Well, that's cool.
We relived some stories about that.
Well,
Really
and
good
it's a reunion
tonight.
for the two of you
Yes,
as
from
well.
Tender Mercies, because that's the
Yeah.
only time we ever worked together.
That's
but
it.
we stayed in touch and
We
stayed
stayed in
friends.
touch, and I remember the time you broke into my house
I
because
know,
I lost
because you lost the
because I lost my key.
my ex-husband climbed over your fence.
Kind
and
of over the
I don't know
fence
how
and
we.
then pulled
my
you
God.
up, and then I pulled us up, and I
We've
tried
got
to get in
cameras
the
rolling,
window
you
that
know?
was open, and I didn't fit, but you were thinner than me, and you just managed to sneak through.